Hello everyone. So in my MFT hybrid ink review video, I had shown this card and I had so many people asking if I could do a video on it, which normally I don't remake a card I've already made, but it's such a simple technique in my opinion. I don't know, it was something I kind of whipped up in the middle of the night and didn't think much of it, and yeah, everyone really wanted to see how I did it, so I thought I would actually remake a card and just show you guys because it's easier to show you than it is to explain. So what I used was some Tim Holtz Distress watercolor cardstock, which I really like. It's really white. I've got the regular watercolor paper that I'll use most of the time, and yeah, I think you can tell on camera, like this is white, whereas most watercolor paper is kind of a off-white sort of color. So I like this for how white it is, and it's perfect to go on just a white card base, which some people do not like doing that when they're working with watercolor paper. They want to use like the same type of medium for the whole card. I find as long as it's kind of the same color, which with this, I just put it on a white card base. That's what I did with my other card. With regular watercolor paper, I'd use MFT's whipped cream cardstock, which is like a perfect match, but I'll get out of that because my camera can't focus with all this white in there. And anyway, all watercolor papers, they usually have like a textured side and then a much smoother side. I always flip it over so I have the smooth side facing up so that I've got a nice smooth surface for stamping. And then I've got my Inspired by Holiday Botanicals stamp set and the poinsettia. So I'm going to ink that up with the hybrid red hot ink. So I've already raved about these inks in that review and on my blog and just everywhere. I really do love them. So ink it up. Make sure I've got the whole thing good and inked. And then I'm just going to stamp it on my card, figure out how I kind of want it. Just gonna stamp it like so. There we go. So perfect impression. Okay, and while I'm at it, before I even start coloring, I am going to stamp the sentiment. Since again, being all hybrid inks I'm using for stamping, it's all waterproof anyway. And it's easier to stamp the sentiment before, whereas after you're watercoloring and the cardstock's warped a little bit, you'll get a better impression if you just do it now. So yeah, I'm loving this ink for sentiments as well. It's nice and black and crisp. So I've got it stamped. This ink dries really quickly so I can get right into watercoloring, and all I used for that was just the MFT dye inks. So I've got Red Hot, Wild Cherry, Paver Red, and a bit of Banana Split. And I've shown this before, but all I do is I take my ink pads and an acrylic block. You could use a piece of plastic, a plastic plate, just something non-porous, a craft sheet, but just anything that you can smush the ink pad onto and get some ink. So I'm just going to smush down the reds here. Okay. So then all you need is your watercolor brush. I've got my Faber-Castell one that I showed in a haul video quite some time ago. All I did, honestly, was I was just picking up ink and putting it on. Like, nothing fancy. I was more testing out how this ink was going to work with watercolor and whether or not it would smear or bleed. Move that over. So yeah, no rhyme or reason. An image like this, in my opinion, is pretty easy to color in, mostly just because it's already got a lot of depth to the image with all the little dots and everything. So all I'm doing is just putting in some color on top of it. Okay, so now that I've got the main color on, I just went back in with the Paver Red, and just in some of the darker areas and the areas where there was the most little spots here, I just started adding that in for some shading, basically. Not picking up very much with my water brush. And if you work quick enough so that everything is still a little bit damp while you do this, you notice I didn't pre-dampen anything. I'm just putting the color in, and then while the color is still wet, adding this in so that it kind of blends out a bit. But even if it did dry, again, I'm not too worried about it. And one that looks like a lot of effort's been put into it when really I don't put much effort into it at all. And don't forget, if you haven't seen my ink review video, to check that out, because I show in the video I had stamped and watercolored this image, like stamped it in black and watercolored it, just to show how different it looks than stamping it in red. And yeah, it gives a totally different look when you do it in black. Alrighty, so I'm happy with how that looks. So I'm just gonna go in, make sure my water brush is clean, doesn't have any red ink left on it, and I want to add that little bit of yellow that I'd done. Just gives it a glow. This time I'm going to dampen the area around the poinsettia because I want the yellow ink to fade out. I don't want it to be like this concentrated like strip of yellow all around the flower, because that would just look weird. So by dampening the cardstock around it, that'll let it bleed out and fade away. So you do that. I usually get my brush really, really wet for this. Mix a bit with water, and then you just go in. Okay, so I'm done coloring the image. I'm just going to quickly blast it with my heat tool to let it dry faster. Okay, and then what I had done was gone in with my Wink of Stella Gold, and I'd filled in the center, and then I'd gone along the petals. I went along all the outlines and then the centers, and just added the gold shimmer. Okay, so once I've got all the outlines done, I went over the center a second time to really deepen it and add a whole lot of shimmer. I don't know if you're going to be able to even see that on camera. It's hard to capture in the natural light. There you go. So it's all shimmery, pretty, and then finally for the embellishment I just used some gold thread, and I pretty much quadrupled it up because it's so fine, like, you know, one little strand you barely see. I think I've shown this before, but when you're working with like threads and twines that don't want to stay taut when you've wrapped around a card, a pair of reverse tweezers is fabulous. You start your knot, use the tweezers to pinch that spot so that everything can't go loose while you're tying. And especially with something like this, it's a little bit finicky to tie because you've got so many threads going on. So once I've got that pulled tight, slip out the tweezers, pull it tight again. Okay, so once I'm happy with the bow, I see I had some ink on my fingers that I probably picked up, and I got a little smear here. I don't know if you guys can see that, but since that's still the dye ink, I can just kind of watercolor it out, and we're good to go. So now, I've got my white card base, and I'm going to score that 5.5 inches because it's 4 1/4 by 11 inches. And then I like to use my Tombow Monomulti to adhere things like this, just because it's been warped a little bit from the water. Doing an image like this isn't too bad, but still, since it's a full-size panel, I like to put on a decent amount of adhesive. Another reason I like the Tombow Monomulti is it gives you still have a little bit of wiggle room before it completely dries, so you can kind of shift it the tiniest bit to make sure you've got it straight before it adheres, and then you can't do anything with it. So, got that all adhered. I'm gonna take the poinsettia stamp again and ink it up with the Red Hot hybrid ink and just stamp it a couple of times on the inside of the card. And there we go. So that is how I made this card. So as always, I'll post a link below to my blog post, and I'll post links to everything. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.